Hey guys, I know that I haven't been active on the channel very much lately. Honestly, there's a lot of things that kind of came up in life, just life in general. And to be completely honest, I got kind of lazy with the whole upload thing. But I did promise that I would do an upload regarding my Wilson Combat short reach trigger, the trigger return spring, and the D-spring. I'm not sure. I'll have to go back and check my other video if I showed you the guide rod and the new spring there. There's really nothing special there. It just goes from a captive to a just to a regular guide rod. But since I promised that I was going to show you something on the trigger return spring and the trigger itself, I figured I'd go ahead and do it. I have already installed this once. Actually, it's already installed on the gun. So in all reality, this is more of just a showing you how to do this. Now understand, the reason why this is already installed before I did this video is I kind of wanted to test it, kind of get a feel for how it functioned, because I didn't want to necessarily say anything good or bad about it until I actually had some rounds through it. Quite honestly, my personal opinion is it is absolutely worth the money to go ahead and do the upgrade. The short reach trigger does make just a little bit of difference that they made in the design of it. Actually makes a whole lot of difference in the way that it feels. Mix that with the new return spring, it reduces a ton of the stacking and it makes that trigger just smooth as butter. And then we have that reduced power D-spring for the hammer. That actually did lighten the trigger pull quite significantly, and now in double action mode it's not near as difficult to pull, of course, and then in single action mode it is absolutely just a hair trigger. Very light, very crisp, and because of the short reach trigger, it's hardly any kind of take up until you get to that point. Now the one thing that I am not going to show you today is the D-spring. There's a ton of videos on YouTube that do it. Quite honestly, it was a pain in the neck for me to get this D-spring out. The reason being is that this little lanyard loop, you do have to depress it, but you can't depress it too far, and then you have to punch that hole or punch the pin out. It's just very, very difficult unless you really have the right tools and everything available. And what I was working with at the time was just basically a punch, a wooden board. It was very inaccurate and all. But let's go ahead and we'll get to the rest of this. Of course, as always, the gun is unloaded, and there is, well, if I can get it open, there's nothing in the chamber. So we'll go ahead and we'll break the pistol down. So of course, let's pull the slide off. We'll set that aside. Now we have the bare frame. The next step in getting your trigger and trigger return spring is going to be taking the grips off. As mentioned before, I do have the Hogue grips, so they kind of wrap around. I've already gone ahead and taken the screws out, so this is just easy. Pop them off. So Hogue grips, set them aside. The next thing that you're going to need to do is you're actually going to need to remove this very small spring for the trigger bar and remove the trigger bar itself. So, easiest way to pull that spring out is have something like a screwdriver, depress that spring ever so slightly, pull it out until it's no longer on that trigger bar, and it just comes right out. There it is. Be sure not to lose this. You need this. Granted, you can find them, but I'm not sure that you're going to want to sit and wait for one to be delivered. But pull that out. With that out, your trigger bar moves pretty freely. Quite honestly, it just pulls out. It's easy enough. With that, there's literally nothing holding the spring, the trigger in, except for the small trigger pin right here. Now, to be able to get to that, you are going to need to remove the slide stop. To do that, honestly, pull it up and then pull it out, and that will release the slide stop, and the spring comes with it. The reason that you need to actually remove that is because the slide stop spring is what holds the pin for the trigger in place. So, with that no longer in there, the only thing holding that trigger in now is, like I say, that trigger pin. That trigger pin, it does not take much force at all to work that out. I mean, I'm just tapping the frame and it's coming out. So, pull out the trigger pin, set that aside, and with that, the trigger comes right out. This is my new trigger. This right here, this is the trigger return spring. It's a little bit dirty from having used it. There's a lot of people that have said, oh, well, you know, these come apart and such. I inspected this one before I put it in. No problems whatsoever. This right here, actually, it drops straight in. However, before you drop that in, you are going to want to drop your new trigger in. So honestly, to install the trigger, it is the exact opposite of what you just did to pull it out. You drop the trigger in, you're going to want to line up your hole for the pin. You want to take your trigger pin and just slide it through there. Easy as that. Your trigger's in. Now, with your trigger in, before you drop in the new return spring, go ahead and install your slide stop. Of course, to do that, you're going to want to take and place the little curved bit in there above your pin, again, because that's what holds it in place. Next, you're going to catch that spring. Well, if I can do it. I'm going to turn this around here. I'm sorry that you can't see, but we're just making sure that we can get all this. You know what? I just realized I'm doing this all wrong. Easiest way to get this in is you're going to put the spring on the actual slide stop first. Then we'll insert that there. And that makes this whole process 100 times easier. Again, whenever you're putting this back in, it's not going to go directly in, so you have to lift it, push it in, then drop it. Now, now's the point where you're going to want to go ahead and drop your trigger return spring in. The way this is built, you're going to have this rounded bit at the back, and then you're going to have this smaller bit at the front. This points towards the front of the frame. This bit right here, that needs to line up with the hole for where your trigger bar goes through, because that's what's going to hold it in place. So go ahead and drop that in, and just make sure that you drop it in between the trigger. It's very, very simple. I mean, it goes almost directly in. Now, go ahead and take your trigger bar, put your trigger bar in. Say that is just an easy drop-in piece. No difficulty at all. Of course, take your trigger bar spring, place it back on there. Easy enough. You can actually do that with your fingers when you're putting it back in. Make sure that it works. Of course, don't drop your hammer on your frame, on your bare frame. But it does work. So go ahead at this point, and you can reassemble everything. Now, before I do that, I'm actually going to show you this guide rod and recoil spring. This guide rod, like I say, I'm not sure if I ever showed this to you before, but this is the Wilson Combat fluted steel guide rod. It is not captive. I kind of prefer that. But this actually makes a huge difference in the way the gun feels. Some people will say that it's just in your head. I personally can feel it. I noticed with the original polymer guide rod that it was bowing quite significantly. I did not like that. I I just went ahead and upgraded it to steel. Most of this gun is steel anyway. I think the only things remaining on it that aren't are, of course, the grips, the safety switch, and then the magazine release. But this is the new guide rod. The spring just fits right over it, and then place it, push it forward, and your slide is assembled. I really like this guide rod. But let's go ahead and we will reassemble the pistol. Make sure that's entirely down. And one thing to remember about the A2 model Beretta is the takedown lever. Once you put the slide on and you rack it, that is going to go up automatically. You don't have to do that yourself. But if you notice here, it's very difficult to see. Very, very difficult to see because of my lighting. But there is significantly less space. That trigger is so much closer to the back of its range with that Wilson Combat trigger, and it's just very, very, very little take up. Just a couple millimeters of take up, and then just a very crisp, clean break. And then, of course, your reset is very short. Like I say, I'm not going to show you the D-spring, but of course, then we put our grips back on, place the screws in it, and you're back in business. Like I say, I really enjoy these upgrades. There's a few more upgrades that I'm going to want to get from Wilson Combat. Primarily, that is going to be the magazine release. I just want something feels a little bit more metal. Also has the checkering on it rather than just being the round button. And then I'm going to get the low-profile, single-sided safety switch. Just because I don't need it. I'm right-handed. I don't need it on both sides. And I would just feel better having that low-profile steel one. It sits so much closer to the frame. Just a quick update on the pistol itself. I have actually put several hundred rounds through it. I'm probably at somewhere to the range of maybe 700. Nah, not quite that much. Maybe closer to 5. I apologize about the dogs, but I'm closer to about 500 rounds through this pistol, and the only, put finger quotes here, the only malfunctions that I had were when I first got it out of the box and went and fired rounds through it for the first time. The trigger, I'm sorry, not the trigger, but the recoil spring does need a little bit of breaking in. For that reason, there were very, very few malfunctions. There were some where some of the ammo was it was failing to feed, but that was because the slide did not actually make it all the way back because the recoil spring being brand new was still very, very tight. I just need a little bit of loosening up and breaking in. Any other malfunctions I had were because it was in someone else's hands, and essentially they were limp wristing it. And when they limp wristed it, it did not cycle like it was supposed to. All of the recoil was absorbed in their arm rather than transferring into the slide and allowing that to cycle. Other than that, I've had no malfunctions out of this gun. Zero. I would, every day of the week, buy this gun again. I have purchased some ballistol, which I am going to start using exclusively for cleaning and lubricating of this particular pistol. In fact, I'm probably going to use it for any pistols that I have. Ballistol, it does coat into the metal, and since it does coat into the metal, it basically creates, if you're familiar with cast iron, it seasons the metal to where it doesn't need as much lubrication. It pretty much self-lubricates it at a point eventually. But the Ballistol, I really like it. I need to put a few more rounds through it just to, just have some fun and, make sure that I'm completely on when it comes to into my aim point with this. I shoot absolutely wonderfully. If you look down the sights, normally when you're firing a weapon, you're going to want to put whatever you're shooting at just to the top of this. Something that I've found with this Beretta, I had a PX4 in a 40 caliber, and it did not function this way. But something I found with this particular Beretta is that whatever you're shooting between 7 and 20 yards, you're going to want to put whatever you're shooting directly behind this white dot on this front sight, because it shoots that straight. Which, of course, that really was a pointless statement. It's going to shoot straight regardless of whether you're putting that target right above that dot or right behind that dot, as long as it hits right where you're wanting it to. But yeah, I did notice that it was shooting low due to that, because I'm used to aiming it a different way. So as soon as I started putting the target right behind that white dot, it's hitting everything every time. So far, the rounds that I have put through it are just regular PMC 115 grain full metal jacket, and the 124 grain NATO rounds, which are slightly hotter than your regular 124 or 115 grain. What I keep loaded in this is actually a weapon that I use in home, just in case somebody comes in, and what I keep loaded into it currently are Federal 100 and I want to say they're either 124 or 137 grain Hydroshock. They are not plus P. However, something that I'm looking to purchase, I have to buy them online, and I just have been procrastinating about it, is the Federal Premium 147 grain plus P HST, the Hydroshock 2. Again, I apologize about the dogs. They like to start fights with each other. But I've seen personally, and as I've read a lot of reviews on the HSTs, the 147 grain plus Ps, they perform wonderfully. They pedal beautifully. They do exactly what they're designed to do, and they do it consistently. Nothing against the Hydroshocks. I'm sure they do as well. It's just I would prefer to have that the HST. But that's the update on this particular gun. Thank you for everyone who has liked my previous videos, who have subscribed. I do need to get some videos regarding my bug out bag and or bags, and just some videos there. Those aren't entirely complete, as I mentioned. I need to do a little bit of modification to them. There's some stuff that are missing. Mainly, I need to pick up some MREs. That, again, has been a procrastination thing. I can pick them up here locally, literally about 10 to 15 minutes away. They sell them by the case. I just have not gotten around to doing it. But, again, thank you guys who have watched my videos, liked them, who have subscribed to my channel. I'm going to try to do a lot more, making sure that content is updated a little bit more frequently, and, well, a lot more frequently, quite honestly, and that I have some more interesting stuff. Something, too, that I am thinking about doing with this channel as well, beyond doing different, reviews and or, personal opinions on gear or equipment, I'm also thinking about doing some gaming. Currently, my gaming PC is completely dead. I'm not sure what happened to it. I'm kind of in the process of investigating that right now. Once I get it back up and running, there's a few games that I'm going to want to play, and I'm not sure if how well that will go over. There's tons of video game streamers out there, and I'm not planning on streaming, just kind of recording and putting up a video. It's probably going to be a lot of the same few games. I'm not Frankie. I'm not Syndicate. I just don't have the funds to be able to run out and buy new games, and I'm not sponsored by anybody. So, but that's something that you might see here. But Here in the near future, look for some reviews on maybe some gear, videos about what is in my bug out bag, kind of the philosophy behind what's in there. And as always, thank you so much again for liking and subscribing, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.